Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now you're welcome along. So we're looking ahead to the weekend's rugby, which this week very simply is Celtic Park 6:30, Leinster against Glasgow in the Pro14 final. Plenty of soul searching to be done meanwhile in Limerick and Belfast after the semi-final stages. We have Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent here in studio, and we have Keith Wood somewhere, I presume, in Killaloo.
I am in Killaloo. How are you?
Very well, very well, very well. So, well, let's start kind of pick through the bones of the semi-final, maybe Leinster, Munster firstly. And much of the post-match discussion centred on Munster, really, Keith. A demoralising kind of sense, I think, engulfing the province or the fans, or even in terms of the way we're analysing it. Probably because we're into some reoccurring themes here for Munster, failing again at similar stages of competitions, and similar deficiencies being exposed and talked about.
Yeah, I think that there's elements of that very true. Some of it not so much. I think we've been fairly honest here all year, discussing through where we think Munster are. And Munster are, I think we said about 3 or 4 weeks ago, thought they were punching above their weight, getting to the 2 semi-finals, and their team is fine, absolutely fine. And for the whole of the Pro14, they seem very, very comfortable, with the exception of a couple of teams that they struggle with. The 2 teams they struggle with most are probably in the final, which is interesting. And the same when you come to the Champions Cup, it's the exact same issue. Those 2 teams are the 2 teams that they are very vulnerable against, that they don't have enough of additional oomph to either have the space to get over the gain line, or the nous to get over the gain line, and they're struggling somewhat in that instance. And I think that's been fair to say all along. And even if I go back over the last, I'm not as negative as some of the views that are on it, and I'm not being overly protective either. But I would have said that the need for Munster were to have all their key game changers to be playing, and to be playing consistently. And to be honest, watching Conor Murray and Carberry being injured and not getting a huge amount of chance to play against each other, Keith Earls and Farrell the exact same, I just don't think they've ever got to know each other very well at a very high level. And you would need them to be playing at their best, I think, to have beaten Leinster last week. So, look, I didn't think Munster got over the gain line at all, and I think a lot of the runners are 2 1-out runners and not coming from depth and not coming with a level of power to get over the gain line. I think that has been a weakness for Munster. And when they're stopped at source, which Leinster's defence were fantastic, and they kind of rode the storm for 40 minutes. When it got to the second half, they just said, well, okay, we can attack a little bit more here, we can do more here. And I thought, without pushing themselves too hard, they were in a lot of control. I know the try at the end made it look like they were twice as good as Munster, but they were just better without having to really try too much. They actually never gave Munster much of a chance in the game.
Rory, Keith there talked about maybe the need for either some additional oomph or some additional nous. Now, unless they go in a raft of signings, then additional oomph is going to be hard to manufacture. So maybe a bit more nous is what people seem to be talking about, and have been talking about for quite a long time now.
Yeah, I think that the signings is the solution that we'd all kind of... The obvious thing to do would be go out and get a couple of Southern Hemisphere players after the World Cup of real quality, in the way they went and got Howlett back when they got Howlett. So that's not going to happen. Van Graan has said that's not going to happen. There is some talk of an outside or of a centre coming in, but he's pretty much rubbished that at this stage, and it's very late in the day. They may get some World Cup cover, whether Albie Mathewson is extended, because I think he actually has been one of those players, a clever signing who adds something to their mix. But I think it's going to have to be nous. And I think where Munster are failing strong, Munster are falling down, is they're not, they should be the smart, they need to be the smartest club around to thrive with the resources that they have, because they don't have the stream of money and players that Leinster do. They don't have the money that their competition in Europe, that they're beating and getting past and getting further than, have. You look at Exeter Chief, who they saw off in the pool stages of Europe in heroic fashion back in December or January. They're going against Stuart Hogg this year. Munster are not able to improve their squad in that way, so they need to be strategic with the appointments that are coming. I think they need to surround Van Graan with really, really good people, and I don't think Van Graan is being set up to succeed. Even when Felix Jones and Jerry Flannery were continuing on in the roles, when we thought they were continuing on the roles, I think he needs support from above, because I don't think he's experienced enough to be a director of rugby style head coach. I think it's too big a role for him. And if Philip Quinn, the acting CEO, is doing the contracts and all that sort of stuff, again, he's come from chief financial officer, he's an interim CEO. There's a lack of experience in the strategy side of the organisation that I think is letting them down long term. And then on the pitch, they clearly don't have the attacking capabilities to go the next step. So they've been set up in the South African style in Rassie Erasmus's year. They've kind of continued to try and build on that. But the big question over Erasmus, after that amazing first year when they reached the semi-final of the Champions Cup and the final when they lost the Scarlets, was how would they kick on from that team that was able to overpower teams, that rode the crest of that passion and that amazing emotion that came about in such unfortunate circumstances in that season. How are they going to pivot then from being able to do that to being able to beat Saracens and Scarlets? And while they've kept knocking on the same doors and they've reached the same stages, they haven't taken that next step. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for this group of players to, I think the more they do it, the harder it's going to be to take that next step, because what are they saying to each other this week as they look at each other again after the same stage? What did Peter O'Mahony say to the players in the dressing room after they got further away from Leinster? I think that's a psychological challenge. So maybe the new voices that come in. So there's I think off the pitch they need to support Van Graan. On the pitch they need to have the right signing in terms of an attack coach, because I think that's the obvious flaw in their game. But I don't think it's going to get any easier for them. And I think they'll do well to get back to this stage next season, which is a challenge.
Just to give you two and the listeners a sense of what's been said this week on the show, two short clips. Andy Dunn was in on Monday, and he's been very consistent in his critiques of Irish rugby and of Munster. He was saying they're really the most fervent exponents of that overly constructive, rigid rugby doctrine, which has become a part of Irish rugby of late. So a quick clip of Andy Dunn here on Monday.
It's a bit of a malaise that has featured in Irish rugby in the last 12 months probably, which is ironic because it's the same style of play that brought us great success, is the run into the opposition as hard as you can, win the physical collisions, recycle ruck ball and eventually exhaust the opposition and break them down defensively. It's not a position of play that has great depth. If you stop a team who does that physically, what else can they do? So I watched Leinster were very, very guilty of it in my mind in the Sarries game. You keep running into the best defence in Europe repeatedly, physically just running in one after another into contact with a view to make space elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's a bit redundant. There are other ways to win in sport than run into people and beat them physically. And if it comes down to a muscle measuring contest only, there's a distinct lack of strategy, of ingenuity, creativity, and it's permeated its way through Irish rugby at key moments in the last year. And I think there's got to be a point where the coaches lighten up, add a bit of fun into the environment and allow the guys who are good enough to be on their squads at that level. They had the wherewithal to get there in the first place. Yeah. They need some freedom to go out and make a mistake, to do something off the cuff and stop playing by script again and again and again. And while it worked so well with Joe and Ireland for 12, 18 months and it got us to the peak, it similarly got us off the peak very, very rapidly. And it's been, I think the provincial sides, probably Munster to the greatest noticeable extent, are the ones who've followed suit.
Andy Dunn there on Monday Night Show. Now, Ronan O'Gara was on OTBAM this morning, our morning breakfast show, which you can catch every morning at 7:45. And he mentioned the Andy Dunn segment, said he agreed pretty much with all of what Andy Dunn was saying. Here's a short section of Rog this morning.
People that get the game would say, they've always been the capacity to have a strong kicking game, but also, play rugby and smart rugby when it's on. But what has probably happened, I would say, in the last number of years, is there's been a resort to a huge pressure game of box kicking and going after the ball that way, while neglecting the capacity to maybe strike from different areas of the pitch when it is on. That would be my only, I suppose, not criticism, but feedback from afar from watching the team, that there's only so much, I suppose, box kicking that people not can put up with, but can endure. But they also want to see, you know what I mean, a 15-man game from Munster. Yes, they love a maul. Yes, they love a line-out drive. Yes, they love a Garryowen, traditional, smart play. But they also feel that the team probably, with someone like, you know what I mean, Chris Farrell, Earls, Scannell, Conway, Sweetman, they still have a lot of good players that would feature in a lot of teams around Europe. So I think probably the piece where people would like them to see more of the team would probably be in an all-round ball-in-hand game.
We're still here with Rory O'Connor and Keith Wood, our rugby coverage, with thanks to Vodafone, team of us, everyone in. Keith, what the lads are saying there tallies with your analysis as well. There's a consistency about what people are saying. Andy Dunn, I asked him, are the players good enough? He said, yes, absolutely, they are good enough. So really this comes down to coaching, and there is now a big pressure to get this ticket right.
Well, I think so. But I would equally say it's good enough for an awful lot. But I don't know that they're necessarily good enough to be at the top table. And if I go back to 2006, 2008, and look at the teams, the Munster teams, which everybody finds a little bit hard work when you have to go back that far. So there was a lot of world-class players in that team. The joy of it was that they were mostly Munster-born, and that was a very big thing, and it's very important. And that's where Munster have to get back to again. You know, but that's going to take a period of time. There is an awful lot of work happening at the academy level and below to try and change that, and there's an awful lot more is going to have to happen over the next couple of years. But that ultimately has to be the view of where Munster want to get to. It's how do they traverse in that interim period of time, and will they need to go out and get a couple of huge signings? And you know, so Van Graan is saying, well, he doesn't see that that's happening, but if that's something that's essential, then it's going to have to happen, you know. And the money would have to be found to pay them and to make those things happen, because you don't want to drift away from the idea of it being Munster born and bred, and there has been a step away from that because there's a recognition that there hasn't been the quality of the players coming through, and that has made it very, very difficult for them. So that's a reality, but ultimately the drive still has to be that you would be looking for the very vast bulk of players to be born and bred in Munster, playing for Munster. That's essential, and you want a couple of world-class players, and that's what they used to do in the past. For me, where Munster get exposed are against 3 or 4 teams. That's all in Europe. 3 or 4 teams. And are they good enough at that stage to play against them? They are, if every single thing goes right for them and they've all their players fresh as possible when they go to those big games. And that has not happened. So the strength and depth that Munster have by the time they get to the last few weekends of the season is not in comparison to the players that they're playing against, the teams they're playing against, and they're struggling with that. Now, we talked about it last week when the news came out that Felix and Jerry weren't coming on, and it's sad to see guys go. It just is. But we've been talking about it, that they were underpowered as a coaching ticket anyway, and there needed to be a third coach that was coming in. So now the dynamic of that changes entirely. And I keep going back to the old idea of what does a professional player say when some change like that happens. And I was wondering, was it the same as it was for me in my day? Is it the same now? And I spoke to a couple of guys, and absolutely, the change is happening. Those guys are gone. Sad to see them go. What's going to happen now? And how does Munster go about it? And if Munster goes about it by saying, okay, well, this is a totally different change. This is unforeseen circumstances. Now we're in a situation where we're taking in 3 new coaches. Where can we actually go and what can we actually get? And how can we make that work to our benefit? How can we use this as an opportunity? And it's not just trying to turn it into glass half full, but that's what Munster absolutely have to do. And I think Rory is fair comment from Rory saying that there hasn't been the amount of support there for Van Gran. Having one coach down all the time has made it very hard. And it was difficult a bit for Leinster in different circumstances for Leo a few years ago. And he got the right man that came in with him. It's made him into a better coach, but it's made them into a far more secure unit. And I think maybe that's what Munster have to be looking for. So do you know what? If all the Munster fans that went to the game in the RDS would all have been disconsolate coming out the door, because they want and believe and hope that their team will do very well. I think in the cold light of day, you'll say they did well this season, but they just did not do as well. And are we strong enough to drive it on with that present squad, and what is needed to make it go a bit further, and maybe more is needed? So would I say that squad I think it's a really good squad, top 4 in Europe, and has been for the last few years. I think that is a fair reflection. So you absolutely need better coaching, higher level of coaching, changed coaching, because Munster have to change a little bit. But I also think it needs a few players.
Right, okay. And just very quickly, if you could, even in a line or two, are the finances there to bring in some heavy hitters, some Doug Howlett types?
I think the finances would have to be there. You know, it requires everybody to get involved, to try and pull additional strings, to bang the doors to get the money in. You know, it's a very tough. The professional rugby landscape at the present moment in time is actually horrible.
Yeah.
There are no clubs flush with cash. They're not. One team in the UK makes money, Exeter. They're the only team. And in Ireland, winning everything, doing everything, you might make 50 grand.
Yeah.
There's not a huge amount of money to be made.
Okay.
I think they have to be really robust in how they go to the IRFU with this stuff. I don't know I'm not sure who deals with David Nucifora there. I know Guy Easterby does it for Leinster, Bryn Cunningham does it at Ulster, and they butt heads an awful lot. But if Munster do have the budget to go to someone, they need to fight that corner. They lost out on Stephen Moore a couple of years ago, turned out fine in the end. But, you know, are they going and talking to, say, Donncha Ryan and Simon Zebo, 2 players who would actually do it, really benefit them at the moment, because Zebo has been a massive loss. Ryan was up at the end of this season. Did they do whatever they could to get an Irish qualifier? You know, there's ways of being creative in this, but I think they need to be really strong with the RFU and going this is what we do for you. Yeah. What can you do for us?
Yeah, fair enough. Something completely different then. Rob Kearney. So. Look, post-World Cup is generally the juncture when some elder big names face some tough truths, and it's usually in the form of reduced terms. That's the way these cycles work. Back page of the Irish Independent today, Rob Kearney's agent Dave McHugh said, the discussion is live and open with the RFU, but it has led us to check other options. We're still hopeful of reaching an agreement with the RFU and Leinster. The RFU has made Rob an offer, but if I'm honest, it's well below where it needs to be, well below. It's been a little protracted. We're struggling to get it to a point where it makes sense for him. It is Rob's goal to continue playing rugby while he is fit and healthy and well. He's a starter for both his country and for his province, and we need it to make sense for him. We appreciate there is an end point to his rugby playing career, but it isn't yet. So when these things are, when you're of a certain age and you're in a certain form, then like Cian Healy, you sign a 2-year deal and things are very easy. When you're in Rob Kearney's position, things are not so easy. Certainly we're hearing a big interest from France, and he's prepared to go. So Kearney will take an IRFU contract, Rory, or else he'll go. He's not going to go on the reduced terms that Leinster will be able to offer him, I would think.
Well, it seems Leinster are... Well, just if we go by Sean O'Brien as an example, it almost seems like there was no deal there from Leinster. Once IRFU was off the table, they almost said, we're not going to... Our budget is already kind of spent on the players that we have. And I'm not sure if Leinster are in a position or want to be in a position where they take the burden of Rob Kearney's wages, because the great benefit of the Irish system is that your budget is without those players. So if he comes off that IRFU contract, Leinster have a decision to make, and they have Jordan Larmour sitting there and they feel ready to go in the next, and presumably that's why the RFU are dragging their feet, that they see him as maybe the guy for the next World Cup cycle, or they're making a value judgment on Rob Kearney that he's probably not going to be in France in 2023.
Yeah. Well,
certainly not an Ireland player in France. He might be still playing for Lyon or someone. So it's a difficult one for Rob Kearney, who has a lot of business interests in Ireland, who seems like he would like to stay, and would like to continue and finish like he's Ireland's most decorated player, and may even feel a little bit like he's owed a bit of something. You know, he's delivered on so many occasions. He was one of the best players in Newcastle a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
You know, what's to say he couldn't do that next season?
That is the rude awakening that players of age get.
Yeah, and look, Gordon Darcy has spoken about, you know, Leinster kind of wound him down to one-year deals, and he tried to get to that World Cup, and it was a bridge too far. But maybe he goes onto a Leinster one-year deal and it's rolling. But he's obviously going to attract interest from abroad. French clubs would love to have him. He's such a consistent performer. He does so much. He ticks an awful lot of boxes from that part of the world. And to me, you know, I can't, putting myself in his shoes, why not go and experience something completely different after all you've done for Ireland? But if he feels he can, you know, players are ambitious, they're confident. You know, he may feel like he's another Lions tour left in him. I don't know, but it's going to be a tricky one for him. And they're going to, if he's going to stay, you get the sense they're going to have to meet somewhere in the middle. The power seems to be in the, certainly he's putting the ball in the RFU court, Dave McHugh, but you know, there's a lot of power in their hands as well, because you know, that they would save an awful lot by moving him on to Leinster or seeing him go, and they would say, right, we're going to invest in Jordan Larmour, for example, for the next 4 years.
Keith, you're reading how all this will play out?
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of the guys over the last few years, there's been play and counterplay from it. For someone like Rob Kearney, and it's funny, what age is he now, Joe?
33, I would think.
Yeah. It's hard to say how it'll play out, or what would you recommend him to do. I think it would be, you know, for a lot of players at the end of their career, or close to the end of their career, will we get another 4-year cycle out of him? I would say that would be highly unlikely. Incredibly fit and all as he is. And I would say post-World Cup, it'll probably be some of the younger guys will be coming through, and that's where the focus will be on it. It may be the idea that it's time to go to France for his well-deserved superannuation payment in some rich French club and do really well. You know, he owes us nothing, really. He has actually delivered for a long time. I think the way he's come back in the last couple of years, because he had a very ropey 6 or 8 months there a few years ago on the back of some bad knee injuries, and he was nearly written off by the medics, the mind by the fans, and he's come back and has delivered again and again. So, look, I think it comes down to Rob. I don't know that it comes down to anybody else. And if he's got options available to him, let him make the right one for himself.
Meanwhile, you mentioned David Nucifora, so he has signed a 3-year deal to stay on as performance director until the end of the 2022 season. He's been here since 2014. Give us a broad strokes analysis of the job he's done. Certainly the Irish Sevens have come on leaps and bounds under his watch. It's hard to know exactly what he's working on day to day, but the Irish Sevens have come on. By the same token, you'll have Philip Doyle on the show saying, well, it's been at the expense of the 15s and the women's. Yeah. And the head coach part-time debacle was a bit of a mess. The appointments of Andy Friend, good. Dan McFarlane's turned things around at Ulster, you'd have to say. You would think the way the Joey Carberry type moves have been massaged into almost commonplace in Irish rugby has been positive for the national team. Give us the overall assessment of Nucifora.
He's brought a cold, hard edge to the way the RFU do business, and I think that was needed at the time that he came in, because they didn't have anyone. It was a new position, and he came from the outside, and he'd broken eggs in Australia, and he'd broken eggs in previous roles, and they kind of needed someone to knock heads together and get things done. And certainly, it's always been a stated goal to break the cycle of players players waiting in line in their provinces to get game time, or to wait behind Johnny Sexton, for example. And certainly, we have seen. If you think back to 2014 and you compare it to now, the idea that Jack McGrath, say a player of his stature, would up and leave in order to get game time was just unthinkable. It was even unthinkable when it kind of happened this year. It's still quite new. So I think that's been a huge success from what he wants to bring in is a more New Zealand style fluid system where a young player sees a logjam and goes, I'm going to go there, and he's looking at it with his big picture. And making those moves happen to a degree, although the player has to have the ultimate say because it's their contract, their future. He's butted heads with some of the provinces. He's blocked moves for certain players. Elton Yanchis to Ulster, Stephen Moore. Ultimately, probably the right decisions at the time. The Ruan Pinar one was one that was very the people in Ulster were really unhappy with. But then they got John Cooney, and he'd see that as a massive success. And I think in the overall top end,
to be fair to him, the Cooney one was huge vindication.
He is not afraid to upset people, and seems to quite enjoy it. From what I can sense, I think he's quite happy, making his decisions and watching them play out. He's quite comfortable in his own skin in that way.
Any big critiques?
The criticism will come from the club game. Would come from the women's game of the Philip Doyle you mentioned. I mean, the women's 15s team has declined massively on his watch. 2014 was the year they beat New Zealand at the World Cup. If I'm doing my maths right, he came in that year, and now they're struggling to make the World Cup next year. He would speak about the lack of depth in the game, the fact that was a generation of players, but I don't think they're giving it enough attention. I think they need to get with the kind of get with the program, for want of a better phrase, but the fact that it's professionalising across the world, they need to be at the vanguard of that. They're not. The clubs are being abandoned. The AAL is getting little to no attention. He's trying to make it a more elite.
What can they do there in that respect?
He's trying to make it a more elite semi-professional bridge between the amateur and the professional game. Yeah. He's getting huge resistance from the clubs. The clubs sometimes don't help themselves. But
do the clubs want to be, well, we are of the community and we're very much amateur?
Some want to be part of the professional game, and the players who are in the club game. There's players who want to be like Gaelic players, and there's players who want to be to be their bridge to the professional game. It's a very complex, difficult.
We might come back to that another time.
Yeah, and then you've got the provinces and the relationship with the provinces, and Leinster in particular. There's quite a lot of friction there, but he would see that as a healthy friction.
You took Joey on us.
Joey, Geordie Murphy, those players that left. There's constant dialogue between the two parts of Dublin 4 where they both live, and I think it's fairly it'll be robust will be a polite way of putting it, but he would see that as being healthy, and it's water off a duck's back. He doesn't mind.
Right.
So he's got Farrell in. He's brought in good coaches across the board. His remit is quite broad, and he kind of lurks in the shadows a little bit, but he does his media twice a year. And he, I would say he's done quite a good job, but there are definite areas that the RFU could improve.
Yes.
He signed off on Grobler, which we criticised quite a lot. There's a lot that he's done in that 5-year time, but I think overall, Irish rugby's probably in a better place as a result of his time, and the proof will be in the pudding in Japan in whatever it is, October 31st or whatever that quarter-final is going to be, because all of those broken eggs are going to come together, and we'll see what sort of omelette we'll get.
Yeah, you are defined ultimately by that result. Keith, we've about 4 or 5 minutes left, and I do want to get on to Glasgow, Leinster, but anything you want to add on Nucifora's reign?
No, I think it's been very important and beneficial that we've had a professional guy in that role, because prior to that, decisions were made at a slower pace, and so I think he's done for the vast majority very well.
Ulster against Glasgow were generally criticised by everyone, including themselves. They were rather dreadful, is the frank truth, which was a disappointing end to what's been a much improved season, and it's not the way Rory Best wanted to sign off. That said, Glasgow were very good, and when they hit their straps, they are very, very good. This has all the makings of a very good final in Glasgow?
I think this is a great makings of a great final. I think two teams that are willing to have a cut, and I wonder whether Leinster will... Leinster didn't really try and throw too many punches last week. They were able to soak up a huge amount. They won't be allowed to do that too much, but whether they may try and do what Saracens did to them 2 weeks previously, whether they try and stop everything that possibly happens for Glasgow. But Glasgow just want to have a cut from everywhere, and their ability to score, their ability to be unstructured, actually, is a little bit of what Rory was talking about earlier on, and maybe a little bit of what Roger, Andy Dunn were saying about the sense of joy. If you were a guy who wanted to, growing up playing rugby, wanting to run it from everywhere, Glasgow would be the team you want to play for, and it's just interesting to see whether it's good enough to be champions, and that's something that's whether more pragmatic works out, and it's rare that you end up calling Leinster pragmatic.
Well, I don't know if you did commentary that day for us in Glasgow. It was in last year's European campaign, Rory, but Leinster squeezed them. It was forwards job. It was a cold, miserable day, and beat them up. Yeah. And by the way, with all this talk, briefest of tangents. We're talking about Munster trying to compete with Saracens or stronger teams. Like, ultimately, Keith, is the stronger team just going to win? For all our talking nous and all this crack, if you got a few Vinopolas knocking around and you're a bigger team, you're just going to win.
Well, I think, look, if we talk about box kicking that has been brilliant for Ireland for 2 or 3 years, it's the teams who have now said, well, we're not dealing with that anymore. The laws have changed slightly, or the interpretation of them, but the other teams have figured out ways to play around it. all these things happen in cycles. And I can go back to early 90s when you played against an England team that were absolutely huge. The laws changed moderately over the next 2 years, and suddenly faster teams were better and were better options of getting around the field. So I don't know. I think all these things change all the time. They normally come up just in time for a World Cup, and you get to see different things that happen. So if you saw how we played in the last World Cup, and then you saw how Argentina played against us by going wide and beating our narrow defence all the time, we hadn't been that exposed in the previous 12 months for it. So I'm kind of happy that we've been blocked in this year. You know, Ireland have been, Munster definitely were, Leinster were, because we have to figure a way around it. That's what you're looking forward to. That's why we're excited by sport, because it isn't the same thing all the time, and it isn't only just power.
Yeah, fair point. Do get your Heineken Star comments in. I'll try and squeeze in one or two for the lads before we go. Rory, I rudely interrupted there with that mini tangent. How are you seeing this final? Leo Cullen calling on the Celtic fans to...
Yeah, I don't think he realised what he was wading into there. He's been getting blasted by Lisbon Lions now, and
who's one of the sons of the Lisbon Lions, plays for Glasgow.
James Craig, isn't it?
This isn't all in the past. Like in Scottish football, sectarianism has been rife this year. It's a delicate issue just now to be kind of quipping about. Maybe Leo wasn't. Yeah,
look, he had a smile on his face when he said it, and it probably got picked up as a serious comment, and it wasn't.
The final itself.
And also all the Celtic fans will all be at Celtic, or all be at Hampden watching Celtic play the cup final, so they won't have much of an influence. Leinster are on their own. But the final itself, I think, for all that Glasgow look amazing and are brilliant in unstructured play, and that the Waikato Chiefs under Dave Rennie were great to watch, and he brought you Mackenzie, James Lowe, and he's a really innovative thinking coach. They do talk an awful lot about brutality, and they do try and beat you up front first, and I think they'll try and take Leinster on in that area. You know, the way Munster did as well, but they probably have more to what they do after that than Munster do. But I thought Leinster's back row was excellent at the weekend. They've got, they're losing Devin Toner, they gained Scott Fardy. Sexton comes in after, not being dropped.
Wasn't dropped.
Not being dropped, but after being rested and after coming on and looking like he was pretty annoyed at being rested, and he felt he had a little bit of a point to prove. So that will be beneficial. And this is a really good test of where Leinster are at the end of a long and interesting but kind of hard to gauge where they've been on the back of their brilliant season. Their best performance last year arguably was their win over Scarlets in the Pro14 final. That Jordan Larmour pick up at the end was kind of the crowning moment of the whole year. But they're in a different mindset this year. They're probably hurt. Well, they are hurting after Newcastle, and it will be, I think it'll be a major achievement to go and win. This competition is flawed, and I've written about the flaws and I've spoken about them in here, but the semi-finals and finals usually do deliver the top teams, and they're usually good games, and they usually reward the best teams. I mean, we've seen Scarlets, Glasgow in recent years being really, really good final performances to win at Connacht as well. I shouldn't leave them out. So this will be a really, really good achievement from Leinster to go to Glasgow, to Celtic Park, and to beat Glasgow on their own turf. And it's a tough one to call. I think it's almost as hard to call as that Saracens game was, although as the week went on I got closer to Saracens, and I'm probably veering towards Leinster this time.
Right, okay. Keith, where are you veering?
It depends on Leinster, actually. I think Leinster are the better team. They're a more focused cup team than Glasgow are, and but Glasgow can score 3 tries in 10 minutes, and they just need to be fully focused. I thought they were very professional last weekend. I really did. I thought it was a very good performance by Leinster. And we talked about Munster not being able to do an awful lot. That was down to the fact that Leinster had their number and were able to block them down. Glasgow are more difficult to block down, I think. But I think it'll be a cracking game. I'm looking forward to that as a game. It's a 2 really good teams in the final. It's what you want for the end of a long league.
Okay, well, we'll chat about it next week, I suspect. So it's a 6:30 kick-off if you're arranging your weekend. Keith, thanks so much. Great stuff.
Cheerio. Over and out.
And Rory O'Connor, Irish Independent. Thanks, Rory.
Cheers, Joe.
Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.